I thought the worst pain I'd feel was from the surgery, but nothing compared to the moment my own son and his wife refused to take me home from the hospital. Lying there abandoned, I realized blood doesn't always mean loyalty, and that night I began to plan the justice they never saw coming. ***, my name is Maria. I am 60 years old, and I never imagined I would live to tell a story like this. I thought the biggest battles of my life were behind me. I had survived the early years of poverty, losing my husband far too young, and raising my son, Daniel, all by myself. I thought the hard days had already tested me, and that the twilight of my life would be about peace, family, and being cared for in the way I had once cared for others. But life has a cruel way of showing you that the wounds from those closest to you cut the deepest. It all began with a surgery. I had been having trouble with my hip for years, brushing it off as normal aches of aging, but the pain kept growing worse until I could no longer climb stairs without clinging to the railing. My doctor finally told me I needed a hip replacement. The thought terrified me. Surgery at my age isn't easy, and the recovery is long. Still, I tried to stay positive. I told myself that once it was done, I would walk without pain again. Maybe even enjoy simple things like strolling through the park or working in my little garden. When I told Daniel and his wife, Anna, about the surgery, their reaction stunned me. Daniel barely looked up from his phone when I broke the news. "Yeah, sure, Mom, if that's what the doctor says," he muttered. Anna, sitting across from me with her perfectly manicured nails tapping on the table, asked bluntly, "And who's supposed to look after you after that?" Her question felt like a slap. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to speak up, but he just shrugged. "We'll figure something out," he said. I tried not to show how much it hurt. I reminded myself they were busy, young, caught up in their own lives. Anna worked in fashion retail and always seemed more concerned with appearances than responsibilities. Daniel, my only son, had grown into a man who seemed distant, more connected to his wife's ambitions than to the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. Still, I believed in family. I believed that when the time came, they would step up for me the way I had stepped up for them countless times. I had put Daniel through college on a single income, working overtime shifts, skipping meals, and taking on extra cleaning jobs to make sure he never felt the absence of a father. I had paid for his wedding to Anna when her family refused to contribute, stretching myself thin just to see him smile. I believed that loyalty and love would be returned, even if only in my time of need. The day of the surgery arrived. I remember lying on the hospital bed, dressed in the flimsy gown, feeling small and vulnerable. The nurse tried to reassure me, telling me it was a common procedure, that I'd be back on my feet in no time. Daniel and Anna came by just before they wheeled me into the operating room. Daniel gave me a quick kiss on the forehead, barely looking at me. Anna glanced at her watch, clearly impatient, and said, "Good luck. Maria, don't worry, we'll be here." Those words replayed in my mind as I drifted under anesthesia. The surgery itself went smoothly. When I woke up, groggy and disoriented, I expected to see Daniel's face first. But he wasn't there. Neither was Anna, only the nurse hovered nearby, adjusting the line and checking my vitals. I asked weakly if my family was waiting outside. The nurse gave me a polite smile and said, "No one is here right now, but maybe they'll come later." Hours passed. No sign of them. The doctor came by to check on me, telling me the operation was a success, that I would need rest and follow-up care at home. "Make sure you have someone to take you home," he said, as though it were a given. That evening, I called Daniel myself. My hands trembled as I dialed his number. He answered after several rings, his voice casual. "Hey, Mom, you okay?" "Daniel," I whispered, my throat dry. "The surgery went well. They're discharging me tonight. Can you come pick me up?" There was a pause on the line, followed by a sigh. "Mom, that's complicated. Anna and I are busy. We've got plans tonight. Can't you just stay there a little longer? Maybe call a taxi?" My heart dropped. A taxi after surgery? "Daniel, I can barely stand, let alone manage on my own." I heard Anna's voice in the background, sharp and annoyed. "We told you. Daniel, we can't deal with this right now." "She's exaggerating. She'll be fine." Daniel muttered something to her, then returned to me. "Mom, we'll come tomorrow." "Okay. Just ask the nurses to keep you overnight." Tears welled in my eyes. "Daniel, they're releasing me tonight. I can't stay here." Another sigh. "Fine, we'll see what we can do, but don't expect us to drop everything. We have our own lives, Mom." He hung up before I could say more. I stared at the phone in my hand, my chest aching worse than my hip. The boy I had raised, the boy I had given everything for, was leaving me abandoned in a hospital bed because it was inconvenient for him to help. The nurse came back later, her face sympathetic. "Your son isn't coming?" she asked gently. I shook my head, unable to speak. She sighed. "We'll see if we can keep you one more night. You shouldn't be alone." That night, I lay in the cold hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory of raising Daniel. His first steps, his scraped knees, his high school graduation. The way he used to cling to me when he was little, whispering that he'd always take care of me when I got old. Now here I was, 60 years old, with a new hip, and abandoned by the only family I had left. I didn't sleep. My heart was too heavy, my mind too restless. The next morning, Daniel didn't come. Neither did Anna. The hospital staff grew frustrated, gently reminding me that beds were limited, that I needed to arrange transport home. I called Daniel again. This time Anna answered. Her voice was clipped. "Maria, we can't pick you up. We're too busy. Can't you ask a neighbor or a friend?" I whispered. "After surgery?" "Anna, please. I can't do this alone." She laughed, a sound that chilled me. "You managed your whole life alone, didn't you? You'll figure it out." And then she hung up. The nurse found me crying, my body shaking from the betrayal more than the pain. She held my hand and whispered, "You're stronger than you know. Don't let this break you." By evening, Daniel finally arrived. He walked into the room, looking tired and irritated, not apologetic. "Come on, Mom," he said flatly. "Let's get you home." But it wasn't out of love. It was because the hospital had called him repeatedly, warning him that they couldn't keep me any longer. As he wheeled me out of the hospital, I sat silently, staring at the floor, my heart numb. I realized something in that moment. I was alone, even with him by my side. Blood may make someone family, but loyalty is what makes someone a son. And Daniel had failed me completely. That night, as I sat in my bed at home, struggling to move without pain, I vowed to myself that this wasn't the end of my story. They thought they could abandon me, discard me, treat me like a burden. But they had underestimated me. I had been strong enough to survive poverty, widowhood, and raising a child alone. I was strong enough to survive this. And I would make sure that the betrayal they had handed me would come back to them in ways they never imagined. This was no longer about survival. It was about justice. When the shock of being abandoned by my son and his wife finally settled into a dull, insistent ache, something in me shifted from stunned to furious. I lay awake that night listening to the house creak and thinking of every sacrifice I had made for Daniel. It wasn't just the surgeries and doctor visits I'd paid for, or the nights I'd sat up with him when he was feverish and miserable. It was the long years of working extra shifts so he could have music lessons. The weeks I lived on dry bread while saving for his college tuition. The nights I cried myself to sleep so he wouldn't know how hard things were. I had turned my life inside out so he could have a better one, and he repaid me with a shrug and a phone call. I told myself, as the moon moved across the ceiling, that I would not be reduced to silent pain. If they saw me as a burden, they would soon learn what it meant to cross me. The first practical step was to assess the battlefield. You can't fight without knowing what you have to work with and what you are up against. My hip was healing, not healed. I walked with a cane and required help with stairs, but my mind was clear as a bell. I pulled the little lockbox from the top of my wardrobe, a box I had kept since Mark died, and counted my resources. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to hire a lawyer if I needed to, enough to pay for someone to patch leaks or take care of basic repairs while I planned. More important was the knowledge tucked away in File's old bank statements. The title deed to the house, cancelled checks for the wedding expenses I had paid, and letters that showed I had never been dependent on anyone's generosity. Those papers were the backbone of my security, and I made copies hidden in different places, because I had learned the hard way that the people around you sometimes turn on you when they smell weakness. I started small and quiet. When you plot a course for justice, the first thing you need is information. I began to take mental notes of Daniel's life the way I used to keep track of little milestones when he was a boy, who he called, what his hours were, the little habits that made up his day. Anna was a different kind of puzzle. At the hospital, I'd seen the way she checked her phone even as my vitals were being read, the impatient glance when a nurse came in to ask me how I was feeling. She cared mostly about appearance, as her fingernails were immaculate. Her clothes were always crisp, and I knew from the way she spoke that she measured things in status. Those traits could be used against her if I handled them with care. The first ally I found was the nurse who attended me the night I was abandoned. Her name was Priya. She had that weary kindness nurses develop after years of comforting people in pain. And when she walked into my room the morning after they left me, she didn't try to pretend everything was all right. She sat down on a chair by the bed and said, plainly, "You should not be alone. Mrs. Alvarez, no one should be left like that." She'd been in the corridor when Anna and Daniel had left. Yes, but she'd also seen the exchange and the way Anna smirked when the doctor asked about discharge. Over the next few days, I learned that Priya had children of her own, was the kind of woman who paid attention to details at work, and she thought what had happened to me was unacceptable. I didn't ask her to break rules for me. I asked her to remember faces and times, and to tell the truth if anyone asked. She agreed, and, more importantly, she wanted to help. Next, I called an old friend, Rosa, who knew a thing or two about local bureaucracy, and who still had contacts in the community. Rosa had been my neighbor for 30 years. She had baked with me when my hands could still roll dough, and she had seen Daniel as a toddler, thumping across the sidewalk with a toy truck. She was a small woman with a big voice, and she loathed bullies. When I told her what happened, she didn't offer sympathy, she offered action. "We need witnesses," she said. "Neighbors talk when they know people will listen. You need someone to speak for you if it comes to it. People will believe what they hear from people they trust." I nodded, grateful and oddly relieved. The town was small. Gossip spread like ivy, and if I could get even a few voices to echo my truth, Anna's version of events, if she had any, would look brittle by comparison. I also began to keep precise records. I wrote down every call, every text, every interaction. I logged the time and the content and the tone. When Daniel called to tell me they couldn't come, I wrote the exact words. When Anna laughed into the phone and hung up, I logged the sound. It's astounding what a sheet of paper can do. It transforms emotion into evidence. It anchors your memory and protects you from the flurry of doubt someone might try to drown you in later. I learned to treat my notes as sacred. While I was organizing myself, the world around Daniel and Anna continued on its small, comfortable loop. They worked, they shopped, they posted pictures of themselves on social media with captions about new beginnings and so grateful. That kind of performative happiness has a brittle core. I could see that in the way they always needed more clothes, more nights out, more things to fill the emptiness. It made me think that maybe their refusal to help me was less about logistics and more about greed and convenience. Greed is a fragile thing when exposed to reality. Opportunity for exposure came sooner than I expected. On one of the afternoons when I was feeling stronger, I hobbled down to the small park near my house. It was the kind of place where people sit and share gossip and watch the world move. I always kept an eye on Daniel and Anna's interactions. The first time I saw Anna with the man from her boutique, I didn't do anything. I watched, took a photograph on my phone without making it obvious, and sent it to myself. It felt like petty revenge, like a tremor before the larger earthquake, but I knew small facts became powerful when stitched together. The image was grainy, but it showed Anna laughing too close, beads of light on her scarf, the man's hand on her shoulder. I filed it alongside my other notes, then I found out something more serious. I'd always assumed Daniel was better with money than his impulsive spouse. But as I pulled old bank statements to see how my savings were arranged, I noticed an oddity, a few transfers from my account years back that I had no recollection of authorizing. There were also the wedding checks I had written. One in particular had been made out to a company that I had later learned was linked to a decorator Anna had recommended. I could feel a pattern forming, influence, persuasion. An attempt to reshape my life for someone else's gain. I took the statements to a lawyer in town, an older woman named Ms. Hargreaves, who had once been a judge. I'd met her at a PTA meeting years ago when Daniel was small. She remembered me and did not charge an arm and a leg for a consultation. She looked at the documents and adjusted her glasses. And then she said the words that made my pulse quicken. "There may be room for a claim here, Maria, if there were unauthorized transfers or coercion involved, and if you can document that they benefited from you in a way you did not consent to, we can explore protective measures." She didn't offer wild promises. She offered the steady cadence of a woman who had handled injustice her whole life. We arranged for her to review everything more deeply. Meanwhile, I had to deal with the immediate problem of my daily care. I needed help with the groceries, with the laundry, with getting to the doctor. The thought of asking Daniel to pick up a few bags felt absurd now. Pride and pain sat together on the couch in my ribcage, but practicality won out. I hired a home aide for a few hours a day, an older gentleman named Jorge, who came highly recommended by Rosa. Jorge was efficient, discreet, and had the kind of skilled hands that made a woman feel returned to the world. He did small tasks, prepared soups, swept floors, ran errands. He didn't do anything dramatic. He simply kept the place running while I worked on the rest of my plan. The plan itself had many parts. One was to ensure that if Daniel and Anna tried any legal trick to remove me or seize my assets, I would have airtight documentation. Ms. Hargreaves and I met regularly. She advised me to make a will that clearly defined the house as my separate property and suggested we file a notice of intent to protect my assets. She also told me about a conservatorship option if I was ever incapacitated, and how important it was to designate someone I trusted as my healthcare proxy. "You must not give them the ability to make decisions for you," she said bluntly. "You have to be the one to say who will look after you." Another part of the plan was public exposure. In small towns, reputation matters. People who behave like hoodlums often do not withstand the pressure of a community that knows the truth. I began sharing my story with those I trusted, not as a plea but as a matter of record. I told the lady at the bakery, the owner of the corner store, the gardener down the block. I did not beg for sympathy. I showed people facts and let them decide. Word spread. Neighbors who had noticed Anna's impatience around me nodding. Store clerks who had seen Anna charge expensive items using a card that later cleared under Daniel's name. These tidbits accumulated like evidence on the table. The most dangerous part of my plan, because it required nerve, was the confrontation I set up at a community meeting. There was a small council event at the church hall, a fundraiser for the local clinic, where a number of people from the social circle that included Anna and Daniel would be present. I announced to Ms. Hargreaves that I would attend. She looked at me with concern and then with a flicker of pride, because she saw the steel behind my wet eyes and agreed to be there as a quiet witness on the night of the fundraiser. I wore a sensible dress and my best pair of shoes. I walked in with my cane and my head held high. People greeted me with warmth, the kind you only find in places where faces are familiar. I sat at a table near the front, and I watched as Anna entered, glamorous and self-assured, followed by Daniel, who by now had the haunted look of a man trying to keep up an act. I was not there for drama. I was there for truth. As the evening moved on, I excused myself and slipped into the kitchen where volunteers were arranging plates. I found Priya, the nurse, stocking cutlery and gave her a slight nod. She understood. Then I walked to a corner and made a call one I had rehearsed in my head a dozen times. I asked the person on the other end, a reporter from the local paper who owed me a favor after I'd once donated a small sum to a youth program, to come to the fundraiser for a small human interest piece. The reporter arrived with his notebook and camera. Not expecting a scandal but ready to listen, I told my story succinctly to anyone who would listen. The hospital, the night abandoned, the casual cruelty. I showed the reporter the photograph of Anna with the man at the boutique and the bank statements that suggested money had been routed in ways I did not authorize. I did not embellish. I let the cold facts do the work. People stared, then murmured, then turned their heads. The room's atmosphere shifted. I watched as Anna's smile faltered and as Daniel's face paled. When the article ran the following week, it was measured and factual. It quoted the nurse, the lawyer, and neighbors who had seen Anna's behavior. It did not accuse with breathless headlines. It reported. But towns like ours are small, and a well-written paragraph travels. Friends of Anna's parents called, relatives of Daniel's colleagues asked questions. Privately, before the piece was even printed, I began to feel the tide turn. There were, naturally, pushbacks. Anna sent a terse message calling my story a fabrication. Daniel called me, voice cracked, asking me to stop because this was hurting him at work. I replied only once. I was telling my truth, and it was time he listened. The plan had other elements too. I looked into the idea of mediation with social services because a formal record of neglect could be established if their refusal to assist me met the criteria. I didn't want them punished unnecessarily. I wanted accountability and protection. Ms. Hargreaves wrote a letter to Adult Protective Services describing the situation, carefully outlining dates and facts. The agency opened a case and started an investigation. They asked questions about standards of care and whether a vulnerable adult had been abandoned. The investigation was clinical and bureaucratic, but it was also inevitable. When people are careless with others' well-being, there are systems that can and should respond. While the bureaucrats did their careful work, community pressure did the rest. Anna's friends began to stop inviting her for lunches. A boutique she frequented sent a note asking for clarification about a charge. Apparently, the vendor required confirmation from the card holder and had reached out to Daniel, who then had to explain why the purchase had been flagged. Daniel lost a client at work because the rumor had reached his employer. He had been seen as unreliable, tied to family drama. Suddenly, the things Anna chased, the parties, the brand names felt thin and brittle. But perhaps the most meaningful turn came from Daniel himself. He showed up one evening, not with excuses but with a raw, pained look. "Mom," he said, and for the first time the word was small on his lips. He sat down and explained in halting, shame-filled sentences how Anna had pressed him, how he had been embarrassed to tell friends about a sick mother needing a ride home, how he had prioritized a dinner his colleagues had arranged over a simple act of filial care. He spoke of guilt and pressure and the slow erasure of the boy who used to bring me flowers. He was not the enemy. He was a man who had become lost. I listened, and though relief flickered through me at his admission, I did not forgive blindly. Forgiveness is not an instantaneous light switch. It is a careful door you open when trust has been rebuilt. I held my ground, listing the steps he needed to take to repair our relationship, honesty, counseling together if needed, and acts that matched his words. He agreed, and his commitment to change became part of the new structure around my life. By the time the social services investigation concluded, the report found that while no criminal abandonment had occurred in a prosecutable way, there had been clear neglect and indifference that warranted interventions. Daniel and Anna were referred to family counseling, and the agency recommended a care plan that included scheduled check-ins and a clear emergency contact list that did not rely on a single overwhelmed relative. The community had done its part. The man who provided Anna with an Instagram-worthy life was suddenly the one left without social invitations, and the couple had to reckon with being seen for who they were. I did not gloat. Justice had never been about spectacle for me. It was about dignity restored and safety ensured. In the weeks after the article and the investigation, Daniel and Anna's dynamic crumbled. Anna left, not with fanfare but with a quiet, slamming door. Daniel stayed, and at first it felt awkward, like wearing a coat that did not fit, but slowly we navigated the small, honest acts of cohabitation, fetching medicine, picking up a prescription, sitting through an awkward counseling session. The house hummed with cautious repair. What surprised me was not the exposure or the social consequences, but the small restoration of humanity. Priya still visited sometimes and brought me fresh bread. Rosa dropped off a pot of stew every Thursday without fail. Ms. Hargreaves sent letters saying things were in order and that I should consider my legal protections well established. I had not wanted to wield guilt as a weapon, but I had learned how to use leverage with tenderness, how to translate indignation into a plan that protected me without punishing lightly. Sitting by my window a month later, watching the neighborhood go about its ordinary life, I thought back to that long night in the hospital when the bright fluorescent lights had felt like lamps of betrayal. The pain in my hip had dulled, and my heart no longer ached with the sharpness of humiliation. I had made hard choices and quiet alliances, collected facts and asked for help. I had turned the humiliation into a structure that made it impossible for someone else to simply erase me. I had, as I promised myself under the moonlight, converted suffering into something I could use to keep myself safe. The fight had not been glamorous. It had been pedestrian, bureaucratic, human. It had required patience, the willingness to be seen, and the courage to ask people to witness the truth. I was tired in ways that had nothing to do with my body and everything to do with the emotional work of being betrayed by your child. But I was also steadier, like a tree that had weathered a storm and kept growing. I had been abandoned, yes, but I had not been broken. And that knowledge, solid and quiet, was a kind of victory I had not known I needed. The weeks after the article and the community fundraiser were like watching a dam slowly crack. At first, Daniel and Anna tried to patch over the embarrassment. They pretended nothing had happened, walking into the grocery store with their heads high, but I could see the stiffness in Anna's walk and the way Daniel avoided eye contact with anyone who might know the truth. They smiled too wide, spoke too loudly, and tried too hard to act normal. In a small town that is as good as a confession, everyone could smell the shame they were trying to hide. Anna was the first to break. She had built her whole life around appearances. The boutique she worked at relied heavily on reputation, and when whispers began to reach her boss, the shift was immediate. She lost her cushy position in the front office and was moved to stock work in the back. Her protests fell on deaf ears, because the manager had heard from enough customers that she wasn't the kind of person they wanted representing the store. Watching her pride crumble was bitterly satisfying, though I never admitted it out loud. Daniel, on the other hand, was unraveling more slowly. He was still working, still holding on to the fragments of respect he had left, but the pressure was visible. His once confident posture sagged, his clothes looked less pressed, and his conversations with me were tentative, almost apologetic. He wanted to repair what he had broken. But he still didn't fully understand that forgiveness isn't handed out like spare change. It has to be earned through consistent action, through proving every day that you are no longer the person who betrayed someone. I didn't rush to open my arms to him. I had spent too many nights staring at the hospital ceiling, wondering if I would ever get home. He needed to feel the full weight of his choices before I could even consider letting him back into the warmth of my heart. One evening, Rosa came over with a casserole dish and some fresh bread. We sat in the kitchen, the air filled with the scent of garlic and butter. She looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes and said, "Maria, you've already turned the tide. But don't stop here. Don't let them think this will blow over. You need something final. Something undeniable that makes them understand you will never be treated like a burden again." Her words settled into me like seeds. She was right. The gossip, the article, the community whispers, they were all pieces of justice, but they weren't the ending. There needed to be a moment where Anna and Daniel faced me directly, with no escape, no excuses, no distractions. I had to be the one to stage that reckoning. I thought about where and how it should happen. My house was sacred to me, a place of peace, so I didn't want to taint it with their tears and excuses. The hospital was to Ra, then it came to me, the church hall. That same hall where Anna had once strutted, enduring community events as though she owned the place. That hall had seen me humiliated once before when Anna mocked me at a fundraiser. Now, it would see me restored. I arranged with Father Joseph, the priest who had known me since I was a young mother, to hold a small gathering. I told him it was for sharing gratitude after recovery. He agreed readily, happy to help me bring people together. I invited neighbors, friends. Even some of Daniel's old classmates who still lived in town. I told Daniel and Anna they were expected to come, that it was a chance for family to celebrate life. They didn't dare refuse. After all, refusing a church event would have looked worse than showing up. On the day of the gathering, I dressed carefully, not flashy, not weak, a simple navy dress. My cane polished, my hair brushed neatly back. I wanted to look like myself, steady, unbroken, dignified. As people gathered in the hall, I moved from group to group, thanking them for their support. I could feel the anticipation in the air. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone was waiting to see what I would do. When Daniel and Anna walked in, the air seemed to still. Anna wore a forced smile, her eyes darting nervously. Daniel looked pale, his hands clenched at his sides. They sat at the table reserved for family, their bodies stiff, their faces tight. When it was time to speak, Father Joseph called me to the front. I took a deep breath, leaned on my cane, and began, "I want to thank all of you for being here today. This past year has tested me in ways I never expected. Surgery, recovery, pain, but those things are not what broke me. What nearly broke me was betrayal. Betrayal by the people I thought I could count on most. The room was silent. Every eye was on me. I turned toward Daniel and Anna. My voice did not shake. When I came out of surgery, I thought the worst was over. But when I called my son, the boy I raised with everything I had, and begged him to take me home, he refused. When I pleaded with his wife, she laughed. They left me there, alone, weak, helpless. Do you know what it feels like to be abandoned? By your own child, to realize the people you love most see you as nothing more than a burden. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Anna shifted in her seat, her face burning red. Daniel stared at the floor, his shoulders trembling. I continued, "But I am here today, not to wallow in that pain, but to tell you that I am not broken. I survived that night, and I have survived every day since. I will not be silenced, I will not be erased, and I will never again allow anyone to treat me as disposable, not even my own family. The room erupted in murmurs, nods, and even a few tears. I could see people looking at Daniel and Anna with open disgust. They couldn't hide now. The truth was laid bare in front of the entire community. Anna jumped to her feet, her voice sharp and desperate. "This isn't fair. She's twisting everything. We had plans." We couldn't just drop everything for her. I raised my cane, pointing it toward her. Plans that mattered more than the woman who gave your husband life. Plans that mattered more than simple human decency. You chose selfishness. Anna, you chose cruelty. And now the whole town knows who you are. Anna's face crumpled, and she fled the hall in tears. Daniel remained seated, his hands covering his face. He didn't move, didn't speak. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. After the gathering, people came to me with hugs. With words of support, they told me I was brave, strong, that I had done what they wished they could do in their own lives. I felt lighter, as though I had finally closed a wound that had been bleeding since that night in the hospital. But the story didn't end there. Daniel came to my house the next day. His face streaked with exhaustion. He fell to his knees in my living room, tears streaming down his face. "Mum," he whispered, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve to even stand in this house. But I can't live like this anymore. I can't live knowing what I've done to you. Please, tell me what I can do to make it right." I looked at him, my heart torn. This was my son, my only son, and yet the pain he had caused me was sharper than any knife. I knew forgiveness couldn't be easy, not after what he had done. "Daniel," I said slowly, "if you want to make this right, you have to change. You have to prove to me every single day that you are no longer that boy who abandoned his mother in a hospital bed. You have to be a man worthy of the love I gave you." He nodded, tears dripping onto the carpet. "I will. I swear I will." I didn't hug him, not yet, but for the first time, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the boy I once knew could be found again. The final act of justice was still to come. Anna had fled, humiliated, but her pride would push her to fight back in some way. I knew she would try to spin the story, to claw back her reputation, and when she did, I would be ready. The days after the church hall gathering felt different. For the first time in months, I walked through town and felt the weight lift off my shoulders. People no longer looked at me with pity or uncertainty. They looked at me with respect. Some even stopped me to whisper, "You were brave, Maria," or "You said what needed to be said." I had carried the humiliation of that hospital night like a stone in my chest, and now that stone had cracked open. The air I breathed felt lighter, sharper, cleaner. But for Daniel and Anna, the aftermath was heavier. Anna did not return to the house she shared with my son. Instead, she stayed with her parents, who were just as embarrassed as she was. The whispers followed her wherever she went. At the salon, women muttered under their breath. At the market, clerks exchanged looks when she walked past. Even on social media, her carefully curated photos were met with cutting comments. "Funny how you couldn't care for your own family, or new clothes won't cover shame." Anna, as I predicted, tried to claw back control of the story. She went to a few friends and claimed I was exaggerating, that I had staged everything for attention. But her words rang hollow, because too many people had seen the truth with their own eyes. They remembered the fundraiser, the evidence, the tears in Daniel's face when he heard me speak. The town had chosen where to place its trust, and it wasn't with her. For Daniel, the collapse was slower, but it was real. He started visiting me more often, not with excuses, but with genuine effort. He mowed the lawn without being asked, cooked simple meals, and sat with me on quiet evenings without his phone in his hand. At first, I watched him carefully, skeptical. Words are cheap. Behavior is what counts. But as the days passed, I began to see flickers of the boy I once raised, the one who used to bring me wildflowers from the field, who once cried when he saw me patching my own shoes because he thought I deserved better, yet there was still so much anger in me. Forgiveness does not erase memory. I could still feel the sting of being left in that hospital bed, my voice trembling as I begged for help that never came. That pain was a scar, and scars don't vanish. They just remind you of survival. One night, Daniel came over late. He sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. "Mom," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you the truth. That night, it wasn't just that we were busy. Anna told me flat out not to come. She said if I left dinner to pick you up, she'd never forgive me. I listened to her instead of listening to you. I chose her over you. And that's the worst decision of my life." Hearing him admit it out loud broke something in me. My heart hurt all over again, but at the same time, there was a strange relief. He was finally acknowledging what I already knew. "Daniel," I said softly, "I didn't need you to be perfect. I just needed you to be there. You could have come for me, even if it meant she was angry. That's what love is, putting aside comfort when someone else truly needs you." He cried that night in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. And though I didn't rush into his arms, I let him cry. It was the beginning of something fragile, not forgiveness, but the first brick laid on a long road back. Anna, however, chose a different road. Instead of humbling herself, she doubled down. She tried to demand from Daniel that he cut ties with me, that he distance himself so they could rebuild their reputation. Daniel, for once, stood his ground. He refused. For weeks, they argued, and finally, one evening, Anna packed her bags and left for good. She slammed the door so hard it rattled the windows. The quiet after her departure was profound. For Daniel, it was devastating. He sat on my couch like a broken man, whispering, "She's gone, Mom," but I didn't comfort him with lies. Instead, I told him, "Maybe this is what it took for you to open your eyes. Maybe you needed to lose someone who never truly loved you to remember the one who always did." Life slowly began to settle into something new. Daniel moved back into my house for a while, not as a child returning to his mother's nest, but as a man who had nowhere else to go. At first, it was awkward. We circled each other carefully, the air filled with unspoken things. But slowly, the rhythm returned. We cooked dinner together, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing small stories. He drove me to my doctor's appointments without being asked. He began repairing the small things around the house, things I hadn't been able to manage since the surgery. Each action was a step toward redemption, though I still held part of myself back. One Sunday, he surprised me by walking with me to church. People noticed, of course. They whispered and nudged each other, but Daniel held his head up, even when the stairs were sharp. After the service, an older woman approached him and said, "It takes courage to admit your mistakes. Don't waste this chance, young man." Daniel nodded solemnly, and for the first time, I believed he might truly change. The ultimate closure, however, came in an unexpected form. A few months after Anna left, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Anna herself. The handwriting was shaky, the words hurried. She wrote that she was sorry, that she never should have treated me the way she did, that she had been selfish and blinded by pride. She claimed she had lost everything, her job, her reputation, her marriage, and now she finally understood the pain she had caused. She asked me, in a few desperate lines, to forgive her. I read that letter 3 times, then set it aside. Forgiveness, I realized, is not about them. It's about me. I didn't write back. I didn't send her anger, but I didn't send her absolution either. Some things don't need words. Some things are answered simply by silence. With Anna gone and Daniel slowly rebuilding, my life began to bloom again in small ways. My hip healed enough that I could tend my garden once more. I planted roses, bright and defiant, their thorns reminding me of my own strength. Rosa continued to visit with her casseroles, and Priya checked in sometimes, smiling to see me walking steadily. I even joined a book club at the library, something I hadn't done in years. Through it all, Daniel remained by my side. He apologized not once, but over and over, not in words but in actions, carrying groceries, fixing broken shelves, making me tea when my joints ached. It wasn't easy, and it didn't erase the past. But it was something real. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel turned to me and said, "Mom, I don't know if I'll ever deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I'll spend the rest of my life trying." I looked at him, my son, older now, humbled by life. And though the scar of that hospital night would always remain, I finally felt peace settle in me like a soft blanket. "That's all I ever wanted, Daniel," I whispered. "For you to try." The betrayal had been sharp, the humiliation unbearable, but in the end, I had found my justice. Anna was gone, her pride her own undoing. Daniel had faced his failure and chosen to change, and me? I was no longer the broken woman left alone in a hospital bed. I was Maria, 60 years old, survivor, mother, fighter, and I had reclaimed my dignity.